on this almost spring We're not holding our breath, are we? Welcome to Illinois Storytelling, our monthly open mic. Some of you are regular faces here. I see you every month. And some of you, this may be your first time, but on the first Saturday of every month, sometimes it's the second, we'll talk about that in May, but we have an open mic. And if you are a storytelling aficionado, whether you're a newbie or an experienced, you are welcome to take the stage and tell your story. And so it's always an interesting, entertaining, enjoyable evening. So we welcome you here on a regular basis. But tonight, we have a very special night. I want to say, has everybody who wants to possibly tell a story signed up? Is there anybody who hasn't signed up who might like to tell a story? I think I got most of you, but I'm just checking. Okay, so let's get going. Let's also thank Dominican University, because Illinois Storytelling and Dominican University Graduate School of Library and Information Sciences host this event, so we always have to say thank you.
And the whole title of it, the long, there you go.
And tonight, our special guest is none other than Don Hall. Woo-hoo!
Not quite the reception that Dominican University got, but they're bigger. They're way bigger. They're way bigger.
So Don Hall, I'll just tell you a little bit about all the things he does. He is the host for the Moth storytelling venue. And has anybody been to the Moth? I know some of you have been to the Moth. All right, so the Moth, some of us have told at the Moth. Quite a few of us have. Some of us have told at the Moth. But the Moth is the third, well, what Don hosts is the third Saturday of every month at the Haymarket Pub and Brewery. And I bet a lot of you have heard the Moth on Saturday afternoon on WBEZ at 2 o'clock. Yeah. Okay, so you know that. Well, you can hear that live in Chicago. There are two locations, one at Martyrs, one at the Haymarket, and Don hosts
The one at Haymarket.
And it's a great night. It's a great, great night. So I encourage you all to go. We'll talk about that, more about that at the break too. But also Don is the Director of Creative Events for WBEZ. And you hear of WBEZ, he was just telling me what it is, but you hear all these live events that they do all around town, interesting events, and he's the production manager of all of those. So he gets these crazy ideas in his head.
And we have fun.
He gets to produce them.
Great gig. Great gig.
Right. And so when you hear on WBC, when you hear that they're doing something live out in some neighborhood somewhere, you're going to start thinking of Don Hall now. And the other thing he's the house manager for Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Yeah.
That's the one that gets you out every time.
So whenever you listen to that show, Don is behind the scenes doing all of the behind the scenes work on that show. So Don has a lot to do with WBEZ, and you can imagine all of those works. But tonight he's here to host our story, our open mic story time, and we're going to do a few things. We're going to do a little fun, and we're going to do a little story play. Don's going to lead it. Then we're going to have an open mic, and those of you that signed up, we're going to draw the names out of the hat until we run out of time. We're going to take a little break, and then Don's going to be a featured teller for us and give us a good taste of some of his own personal stories, which I have heard at the Moth quite often, and I really like your stories.
Well, thank you. Yay.
So, Don Hall.
Hey.
All over Chicago, every single night of the week, there are storytelling events. And not too long ago, I was having drinks with some of the folks that do this, and there was the big complaint that, God, so many of them. There are too many. There's too many. And I looked at Tyler, who is the producer of The Moth and is also my assistant at WVEZ, so we have a very strange power dynamic. And I said, do you ever listen to what I say at The Moth? And he said, yes. Do you really? I said, because it's not about the show. It's far larger than the show. It's about people sharing stories with each other. That's the point. It's cultural, it's big. So I'm gonna ask you, how many people in this room have told a story in front of an audience before? Okay, awesome. How many people have not? Okay, so and it's okay. Not everybody can play guitar. Okay? But what I will challenge all of you that have not told stories before in front of an audience, you tell stories every day. You tell stories constantly. And the only difference between telling a story to your colleague or somebody at a bar or a stranger at the bus and telling a story in front of this, the only difference is the room. That's it. So find that, do that. I think it's very, very important for people to tell stories. So we're gonna start with a story play. And so if you raised your hand and said that you've never told a story, I'm not gonna pick on you, because that's no fun. But I am going to encourage you to participate in what, it's sort of, you know what an exquisite corpse is? Exquisite corpse is basically a poem written randomly, where I write something and close the thing, and you don't get to look at it. And then you write a line, and then we close it. And then eventually, we have this full piece of poetry that is kind of group written. So we're gonna kind of do a live exquisite corpse, not poetry, unless you just really want to throw some poetry in there. And that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But we're gonna tell a story. Think about what elements of the story you want to hear. I will tell you that when you do this with grade school kids or high school kids, the story is always about violence. It just is. Somebody did this thing, somebody interrupted, and then we fought. That's what happens, because we've kind of got this in our heads that conflict is the only way to tell a story, which is not the case. But we'll see where it goes, all right? And so everybody, when you're ready to tell one sentence, and I just want to say not a Proustian sentence, not like 17 lines and no punctuation. Find a period, you know what I mean? But one sentence, you say your sentence, sit down, and whoever wants to add to that story, just stand up and say, just add in, yeah? And say it loud so everybody can hear. Cool?
Cool. Yeah.
All right, so let's start. All right, go.
I was walking alone down the path in the secret garden.
And it was so beautiful because some new growth was just starting to sprout.
Oh, yeah.
No one knew just how tough a rose can be.
And a late comer was passing by.
Yeah.
And she was barefoot and she found out how tough that rose was.
Crap!
That is brevity.
That is a shadow peeking out behind the bushes.
Okay.
In her hand, she held a special package.
It was a package from the prince.
Package from the prince, yeah.
But it wasn't for me. Packages like that are never for me.
It kind of reminds me, have you seen Garfield without Garfield? That's what it kind of reminded me of. It's sort of like, wow, here's what's going on, but crap. Cool. All right. Yes.
You took my name in vain. I'm Garfield.
Oh. So it's sort of like if we did that again, but you were going to the bathroom, right? Garfield without Garfield. Okay. All right. All right. So let's do some open mic. Let's tell some stories for each other. My dad is sort of old school. He's in Kansas. Older gentleman, because he's my dad. And how it worked. I don't know how that worked. It's kind of worked that way. To give you an idea of who my dad is, he was a biplane stunt flyer and was actually in the movie The Great Waldo Pepper. He then became a rock and roll DJ. and then became a real estate king in Kansas. And in his office, as a real estate agent, he had a portrait, not a print, an oil portrait, 4 foot tall of John Wayne in his office. That's my dad, okay? Old school cowboy. And one day we were talking about all the strife, and he's like, "You're living in Chicago, and there's all this racial strife, and there's all this violence." You know, I said, "Well, Dad, what do you suggest? What do you suggest we do about it?" He goes, "You just gotta sit down and have a meal with people." And I said, let's take it one step further, because I don't know if you know Coco Winbush. She is a chef on the South Side. She is a genius. And her mantra is, go eat a meal with someone who looks nothing like you. And ultimately what happens at the meal is you tell stories. So that's what we're gonna do. We're having a meal and we're telling stories. And it's an open mic. Here's the rules. There are really no rules. I'm gonna call your name, you're gonna tell a story. I will tell you that at the Moth, we have a 5-minute rule. And I promise Margaret, and you will probably get used to this as you hear me talk, my language is a little salty. I'll do the best I can, but I'm kind of an asshole. And at the Moth, I'm a little more rude, but this is your house, and so I will be as polite in your house as I am capable of being. But in 5 minutes in the Moth, at 5 minutes, it's time to shut up. It's time to stop talking. You were done. We're not doing that here. We're not doing that. You just tell your story. You just tell your story. We would like to keep it within 5 to 8 minutes. If you're going 30 minutes, it better be a really, really good story. Okay? Because I got an iPad and I get bored fast, all right? Angry Birds. So, that's it. Keep it 5 to 8 minutes. Have fun. Tell your story. Make sure you project so everybody in the back of the room can hear you. That's pretty much it. Where's my... All right.
Here we go.
You ready? Yeah. All right. I'm also going to say that going first is hard. So when this name is spoken, think your reception for Dominican University and wait, don't tell me. And combine them and then amp them up like a soccer mom whose son isn't really good at soccer. But damn it, she's going to be supporting. That's what this first person is. Our first storyteller, Vicki.
Vicki Albert.
That's the one. The floor is yours, Vicki.
Thank you. I understood 5 minutes, so that's what I'm prepared for. I have one 5-minute story.
You're awesome.
It took place a long time ago, and I call it Conversation with a Stranger. So I was riding the Fullerton bus east, reading a book, minding my own business. I was headed for an acting audition. Back then, I loved the theater. It was so intense. You could fall in and out of love in half a day. Go shopping with your friends. So I'm on this bus when a tall, gaunt man staggers on and looks round for a seat. Now, the bus was only carrying about a dozen passengers, so there were plenty of empty ones. But these were evidently not to his liking, for he chose to sit next to me. Now the stranger smelled of strong spirits. He was silent for several moments and then began giggling for several more. Then he began to mutter, I don't know, I just don't know, I really don't know, I don't know, do you know? No what? I asked. I don't know. Silence. And then, is that a book? Are you reading? Are you studying? Is that the Bible? No, a play. A play. I'd like to see a play. Yes, I would indeed, I would. I'd like to see a play. Sarcastically speaking. Sarcastically speaking? Well, I'm a pretty bright guy, IQ 172. Pretty good at science and history. But ever since I've been on my own, everyone tries to mother me. Oh, they think you need taking care of, eh? I was amused. The stranger's face was lined. He appeared to me to be well over 40, which to me at that time was ancient. Yep. And hard as I try, I just can't seem to deal with manufacturing. Like I didn't have a clue. I thought I'd take a stab. You don't like to work? Nope, not a bit. Not a teeny tiny little bit. And I just can't seem to fit in too well with the outcasts of society. It was then his conversation took an abrupt turn. I could kiss you all night. No, you couldn't. Hell, who's stopping me? I would. Was then that he had an idea. He wiped off the traces of ketchup and mustard as if these were the source of my distaste. I could put lipstick on. And I could wear stockings like your girlfriend the other day. What do you know about my girlfriend? What makes you think I like you better with makeup on? Well, men like girls, don't they? I suppose so, but hell, you're the captain. And he crossed his arms and turned away and didn't say a word, which was just fine with me at that point. And then all of a sudden, he turns toward me, screws up his face, and in the harshest voice says, "Hey lady, are you trying to make out with me?" As if you're trying to get fresh with me, I want you to know that I'm a clean-cut American guy. And he gets up and with great dignity starts walking toward the front of the bus. Well, I'm mortified. I mean, he was pretty loud, and if the other people think I'm hitting on this bum. I look around, and one lady's laughing, and another's nudging her neighbor, and I'm encouraged by this, probably too encouraged, because I call out, "Hey, you! Yeah, you, Mr. Clean-Cut American Guy! Bravo, excellent performance, but you're a big boy now, you can protect yourself from the likes of me." And the whole bus erupted and laughed. But the look of rage he gave me, I'll never forget till the end of my days. He advanced onto the driver, stuck his face into the driver's face and said, "Hey driver, this lady insulted me, now what are you going to do about it?" So the driver kept his eyes on the road for eternity, it seemed, till we reached the man's stop. He got out, walked around to just opposite me. His lips were moving. I think he was muttering curses and giving the bus a final kick. He turns round and catches his subway. Well, my audition afterwards didn't come off too badly, though I regretted it wasn't as dynamic as the performance I had just witnessed on the bus. I love the theater. So intense, you could fall in love, die, murder someone in half a day. And afterwards, leave the theater with no regrets. Conversation with a stranger.
I will say that "Hey lady, are you trying to make out with me?" is actually a pretty effective pickup line in my experience. I'm just, "Hey, are you gonna buy me a meal?" That works too. Every time. So there you go. Lovely story. Our next open mic, Lynn Horgan. Go!
Thank you. I have a mother who lives in a nursing home not far from me, so I'm a very frequent visitor there. And not long ago, I started to notice another pretty frequent visitor. He's probably in his late 80s. He's about 6 feet tall. He has a full head of really dark hair with just a little bit of gray seasoning in it. And every time I see him, he has a pair of crisp blue jeans on with a nicely starched shirt and a sweater vest over it. And although he kind of walks slow and has a little bit of a stumbly gait, he still is a pretty striking figure as he wheels his wife in her wheelchair through the hallways. His wife, on the other hand, has the perpetually vacant stare and kind of disheveled demeanor of a person in the late stages of dementia. And not long ago, I was there and I saw him leaving the dining room with her tray of food and had a plate on it and had pureed meatloaf and pureed carrots and pureed potatoes. It was baby food, really. And I'd seen him many times leave the dining room with her tray of food and he'd go and take it into her room. But this time, he took the tray and he took her into the lounge area where I happened to be sitting with my mother. And I watched him as he, in that kind of old person's methodical, careful way, put the plate down and then he put the napkin down and he opened it, took the utensils down out and he arranged the glass and he tucked the napkin into her blouse and he slowly began to feed her. And I was far enough away that I couldn't actually hear what he was saying, but I could tell that he was quietly trying to encourage her to eat. And I don't know how many of you have experiences with nursing homes or have observed old people being fed, but I've seen it a lot now. And every time I see it, it causes me to pause. Because I think, these were once vibrant people. They held jobs, they raised families, they came to events like this, they laughed hysterically at stories, they gave money to charity, and they prayed to God that this thing would never happen to them. And yet there she was being fed like an infant by her husband. And a few days later, I was there again and I was about to leave after visiting my mother and I saw him again in the lounge area. He was reading a book and his wife was in the wheelchair beside him and I thought, I want to go say something to this guy. So I walked up to him and as I approached him, I just said, hey, you're a pretty faithful guy. And he looked up and I could tell by the look on his face that he hadn't heard what I said, so I reached out to shake his hand and I said again, hey, you're a pretty faithful guy. And he said in kind of a gravelly, soft voice, well, I come to feed my wife. She doesn't eat much anymore, and I just want to make sure she gets something. And I said, well, that's pretty cool. Well, what's your name? And he said, Paul. And then as if the very next thing he always said when he said his name, he said, and this is my wife, Ruthie. And he directed my attention to his wife. And all the times I go there, I try to remember that inside those decaying bodies are still human beings, and I try to recognize them and I try to acknowledge them. But here I was standing next to her, and I didn't even give her a single thought. But not Paul. Paul, with that nod to his wife, said, this is somebody you should know. She's still my Ruthie. She's bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, and to know me is to know her. So I kind of leaned over and I said a couple words to Ruthie and I told her how pretty she looked in her blue sweater. And then I said, Paul, how long have you guys been married? And he said, 50 years or so. And he said, Ruthie always said she wanted to go first. And I guess maybe that's how it's gonna be. But I'm gonna be so lonely when she's gone. And I thought, lonely? Aren't you lonely now, Paul? Ruthie hasn't spoken an intelligible sentence in a long time. And she hasn't lived in your home for at least several months. And I thought, you know, in my mind, I see Paul living alone in their house. And every morning he kind of shuffles to the kitchen and he maybe puts on a pot of coffee and makes a bowl of oatmeal. And then he picks up his one bowl and his one cup and his one spoon. And he goes to the kitchen and he goes to the sink and he rinses it out. And maybe later on in the day he puts in a single load of just his clothes in the wash. And in the evening after he's come home from feeding Ruthie, he pulls the covers back on their double bed and he crawls in alone. And yet to Paul, the idea that he still had Ruthie with him, even in the pieces, parts, and the fragments of what she must have once been, made him less lonely than he knew he was gonna be one day. And so I said the only thing I could think to say to him in response, and I said, yeah, you are gonna be lonely. But I hope that you will know that you were very, very kind to her all the way to the end. And then what he said just took my breath away. He said, well, I believe a husband is supposed to love his wife and take care of her. So that's what I do. And I, kind of was bent down to zip up my coat and I was getting ready to leave and I reached my hand out again and I shook his hand and I said, Paul, you're a really, really good guy. And he kind of just gave me a half smile and a little wave as I was starting to walk down the hallway. And this literally happened just a few weeks ago on one of the coldest days of this winter. And typically when I leave the home in the cold, I try to run to my car and get inside. And I found myself this time walking pretty slow because I just had to kind of process this conversation I just had. So I got to my car and I unlocked the door and I turned the key in the ignition. And then I could feel the tears starting to come to my eyes and I kind of leaned back in the seat and I just thought, wow, there really, really is nothing that can hold a candle to love. And I thought, if Ruthie could just speak one more time, I think she would agree with me. Thank you.
When you were telling your story, I've got one major regret in my life, which is probably, I've done a lot of stupid things, but one that I wish I could take back was my grandfather, who was World War II vet, oil rigger. He was my father figure growing up, and when I was 9, he bought me a cassette recorder and would drink Jack Daniels, and I would interview him, and he would play characters, the smartest man in the world, the poorest man in the world, just hours and hours of stuff. And when I was 13, the cassette tapes actually got destroyed by a Stretch Armstrong. If you remember those, that popped and the resin just covered it and they got thrown away. I regret every day that I don't have those. With that in mind, my dad, he's not quite, actually he is about the age my granddad was when we did those tapes. I bought him an iMac, like a laptop, laptop, and a big microphone that would be USB. And I asked him if he would just record stories of his life. And then every once in a while, and then he loaded them up onto my Dropbox. And then he'd say, what other stories do you need? I'd say, tell me about a divorce. And then he would go, okay, tell me about the time you met Minnesota Fats. Boom, boom, boom. I have virtually 25, 30 hours of my dad telling stories. And I will never regret that. So I think that's one of the things, it makes me wish Paul had recorded Ruthie. because then you're not so long. Good stuff. Our next story from Homewood Stories. If you're not familiar, who's around Homewood? Who's in that area? In that area? All right. All right. I met this woman, what?
A long
2
time
decades ago, something like that, in an improv class, comedy sports class, so many years ago. She is now hosting Homewood Stories, which is this month is Tuesday, April 22nd. Usually it's the last Tuesday, third Tuesday, and it is a storytelling night, so you should go. Karen O'Donnell. Come on, go!
And thank you, Don Hall. The first time I went to a storytelling, and I thought, Don Hall? Was it maybe 20 years ago? We were 12.
Something like that, yeah, we were just children, it was crazy.
That's why I took that improv class. And in Homewood, Amy lives in Homewood too, I just found out. During the day, I get to tell stories to captive audiences of hopelessly mute while my hands are in their mouth doing dentistry. I introduce myself as a storyteller, they're usually ghost introducing themselves as a dentist. But about a decade ago, maybe it was when we were doing the improv class, I wanted to expand my career more into speaking, rather than to one person at a time. I thought I knew somebody who was a speaker, and it's like, boy, I would like to be like him. I'd like to do that. And I didn't know then when I went into dentistry that, gosh, fear of dentists is like the top 5 fears. It's above fear of spiders, and I'm afraid of spiders. And fear of public speaking, I found out, is the #1 fear, above fear of death by drowning. So it's like, Don said, face your fear, Karen. Go for it. And a friend who was really successful in speaking said, just get out there and do it. Just do it, like 100 talks, 200 talks for free. Just do it. Come up with a talk and do it. So I came up with a talk about overcoming obstacles. And then I did, the Rotary clubs, the Optimist clubs, the Lions clubs, all those civic organizations have weekly meetings and they need speakers. So I found the Rotary presidents in a book, you could look that up, and I would call the president and I'd say, oh, who's your program director? And they'd give me that name. Then I would call the program director and I'd say, the president gave me your number. Which was true. So I didn't think it was, but anyway, it was very easy to book. I was booking at least once a week, sometimes 3 times a week. Most of the time it was a luncheon meeting, sometimes a breakfast, sometimes a dinner, and all over the place in the south suburbs, west suburbs, and it was a lot of fun. Talk number 57 came right back to Homewood. It was going to be at Calumet Country Club. I'm very familiar with. I'd spent some time there, and it was within 2 miles of my home. And this time it was going to be a dinner meeting. And it's always my practice to get to the event at least an hour early, because I want to sort of zen the room, see what the stage is going to be like, if I have to move chairs, and fill it with white light. So I arrived at Calumet Country Club an hour early, and to my surprise, all the guests are already there. Because it was mostly retired men with the Kiwanis Club. So I walked through the main dining room, and it's like, hey, it's showtime. I don't have any time to make my move or whatever, and step into this porch area where you can see the 18th hole. And the man who invited me to speak, Mr. B, was like, oh, Karen Wright is here. Now, he introduced me as Karen O'Donnell. Karen Wright, I'm not married anymore, but I haven't used the name Karen Wright since 1977, a long time ago. And so he puts his arm around me, pulls me real close inside, and he's like, oh, you guys, this is Karen Wright. She used to do sleepovers at our house. And so here I have the folder with my talk and my outline and my intro. And so I'm like, well, thanks, Mr. B. Would you mind reading this word for word? Because it leads right into my talk. And it's one of those introductions that would make mom so proud about the things I got awards in, and I'm the first female president of the Chicago Dental Society in the South Suburban Range, all this sort of stuff. It's like, if you would read this would be great. But he introduces me to everybody with his arm around me, like, this is Karen O'Donnell, Karen Wright. She did sleepovers, which was true from 5th to 8th grade, because I went to grade school St. Joe's and Homewood Flossmoor High School with his daughter, who I had not seen in at least 30 years. So then, I figured this is the room we're going to do it in, but everybody starts to move towards this other room. And when we step over the threshold into that, an instant memory flashback, because now we stepped into the boardroom. It was a small group. You step into the boardroom and it was a double long table, double wide table for about 18 to 20 chairs, no windows. A decade before I was in that room, the first time a female was in the room for a meeting other than the wait staff. Because I had become the first female regular equity member of the club. There were women members of the club back then that didn't have voting privileges. We called them the worms. They were wives of regular members. And the reason I was in this board meeting was they accepted my membership. I paid the same dues as the men paid, but they were not going to allow me to golf on Saturday or Sunday mornings or Wednesdays because that was men's time. And the club was 100 years old, so it was time to break some rules, change some rules. So I approached the men. I wanted to be judged as a golfer, take gender aside. So when I stepped through the threshold with these men, I'm just totally flashed back to that moment. And I sit at that Mr. B sat at the head of the table, and I sat right next to him. And they're going to serve me food, and it's like, oh, you know, I hope I'm always have butterflies before I talk. And if I eat, I'm not sure what they'll do. Or what noises I'll make. And if I don't eat, hopefully I can keep those butterflies in alignment. So I asked them not to feed me, but they did. So I'm just like playing with my food, and I can see his agenda is out, so I pushed that introduction right in front of him again. And then I thought, you know, I didn't like make my move. I didn't fill the room with white light. I've got to take a moment here. They do the Pledge of Allegiance. They got the treasurer's report. So I thought, I got a few minutes. I'm going to step out to the women's restroom and just take a little break, center myself before I come back, because I wanted to be professional and do the talk well. Now at that time, the men's, my brother's a fireman, so I know this, he was there, but the men's locker room is down a double wide carpeted step, and there's a mahogany bar with a big mirror and a big screen TV, and a workout room and like a sauna. And I went to the women's locker room, which was in the basement down a thin, narrow stairway. The utility room where the furnace and water heater, and they kept the brooms and mops. And then I get there and I thought, okay, I'm going to look in the mirror, make my move. And when I look in the mirror, my hair is sticking straight up from all the times that he pulled me over. It's like men don't, I mean, you know, they just didn't say it. So I look in the mirror and I'm like, are you kidding me? I got this nice silk suit on. And it's like, well, you know, I used to be part owner of this club. So I know where everything is. So I look underneath and I open the cupboard to get the spray, to get the Aquanet, all that sort of stuff. I grab the spray, I fix my hair, I don't have a brush or anything with me. Take it and I spray profusely to mat this stuff down. And then I look in the mirror and I look up. And I look in the mirror, and I look at the can, and white foam descended on my head and shoulders. It was scrubbing bubbles. I just and I couldn't get out of the way. You know? So I'm screaming because it's like a silk suit. It's all in my silk suit. My hair is matted down, and it's showtime. I don't have time to do anything. I'm pulling out paper towels on. There's no blow dryer, there's no brush. And it's like, can they hear me? And I step down the hall, and it's like, I'm a professional. I'm here to deliver a talk. Right when I walked in the room, he introduced me. It was Karen Wright, the girl who used to do sleepovers. And I gave that talk, and that was the first time in my life that I had never looked at anything I wrote. I didn't even look at my outline. I made eye contact with each of the gentlemen at that table. I delivered the message. And at the end, I ran to the door so I could shake each of their hands and thank them for coming individually. It's like, you know, thank you, I appreciate you. Wondering if they knew that I looked like I had that Vitalis slicked down there. Could they smell that, you know, that familiar smell of bathroom cleanser? As I shook the last one, it's like, is my hair going to fall out in clumps? Does that smell? No, I am a professional, and I demonstrated how to overcome obstacles.
All right.
The answer, did they smell the scrubbing bubbles, is a resounding yes. I wasn't there, but I can tell you. And you should do sleepovers professionally, but not as tawdry as that sounds. Just saying.
We'll talk later.
There you go. Nice work. All right, moving on. Eden Novak. Go!
I'm a virgin here tonight. I was gonna read something, but I'm looking at everybody, I'm like, you'd be like, she's reading. So I'm just gonna tell a story. It's an old story. He stuck a knife near my face, opened up the car door. He got in, pushed me over, and drove off. Crap! It was 1978. I was a freshman at DePaul University, and I was going out to get paper, to do a graph paper, to do a paper in accounting class. Why I was in accounting class at DePaul was my choice. It wasn't my choice. My dad said, you're just going to get married. This is 1978. My dad said, you're just going to get married and have kids. I'm like, what the fuck year is this? So I hollered and screamed and hollered and screamed. I said, you paid for Vanessa's college, you paid for this college, you're going to pay for my college. My mother finally said, okay, we'll pay for college. First semester, that cash cow ended. So I take her gold Cadillac with champagne leather interior to the local Walgreens. It's Sunday afternoon. Man comes up to the car. I'm parking as far away as possible because in order to drive her car, you have to keep it as far away from other cars as if there's 20 cars in the parking lot, you have to be, way out like blocks and blocks away. So here I am, farthest place away, and somebody's walking in the parking lot. I go to lock the door, the window's open, shut. He opens up the car door, sticks a knife in, moves over, drives off. And I'm thinking, oh God. So then I remembered a dream that I had had not too long ago, and it was the dream. This was the dream. I was living this dream. And he was driving in the direction of my house, which was the last place I wanted to go, but it was the first place that I wanted to go. And so I'm escalating, my anxiety's escalating and escalating. And he's telling me, you need to be calm, you're making me nervous. And I'm looking at him with the knife, and I'm like, I'm making you nervous, you asshole? And his anxiety's escalating. So I decide, okay, I need to calm down. So he says, I need to relieve myself. Where is a quiet place that I can take you? And I'm thinking, oh shit. And I'm picturing myself on, the nice ground of the forest preserve looking up, and that's the last thing I ever see. And so the first thing that came up to my mind was 6721 Gulf Road. It's right around the corner. You can pull up the driveway. Nobody cares about me, so nobody will mind that we go there. That was my house. He kind of laughed, and he kept driving. So I said, I've got to keep him off of this idea that he needs to relieve himself. And so I started asking him about his family. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Where did you come from? So he starts telling me his story. Yeah, I'm divorced, and my wife doesn't like me, and my kids doesn't like me. And I'm like, yeah, I know that story. And I started feeling sorry for him, knowing that I had a crazy-ass mother at home, and a crazy-ass alcoholic father at home, too. And I started feeling sorry for this guy. And so we became buddies. We were buddies. We're driving. And finally, he's like, you know what, I've got family up in Milwaukee, and we're going to go up there. And I said, I can't go with you. I have finals tomorrow. And so he left again. So we're driving, and finally I said, I got him to let me go. So he said, where can I drop you? And I said, 6721 Gulf Road. It's just somewhere near here, and you can just leave me there and take the car. So he said, no. Where can I drop you? I said, right here. So he stops the car. He didn't really know where I was because I wasn't paying attention. And he lets me out. And he said, which way? I pointed in the direction, and he said, don't call the police. I said, right. My mother in her treasured gold Cadillac with the champagne leather interior, I'm going to come home without the car. Where's the car? I don't know. So I said, whatever. He left. I dropped to my knees. I went to the first house, knocked on the door. Do I call the police? No. I said, can I use my car was stolen. Can I call my parents? I called the house. My brother answers the phone. He's 7 at the time. Get Ma on the phone. Why? I said, "You got Mom on the phone right now." He hangs up on me. And I'm looking at these nice people, and they're like looking at me like, "This is the crazy woman. Why'd you let her in the house?" And so I dialed the phone again. I'm like, and he answered the phone and said, "What?" I said, "If you don't get Mom on the phone right now, I'm going to put my hand through this phone and rip your lungs out through your mouth." And so he's like, he just dropped the phone, and I can hear him go, "Mom!" So this time passes and time passes, and I'm just like, okay. And finally my mother comes to the home. She's like, "Where the hell are you?" I'm like, "Well, the car was stolen, but I'm okay." She goes, "Where's my car?" I said, "The car was stolen. It's on its way up to Milwaukee, but I'm okay." "You let somebody steal my car." Like, "But I'm okay." So the police come, I go to the police station, we go home, and then I'm with my entire family, sitting at the dinner table, and they are yelling at me. "Why the hell did you let this man take the car? What is wrong with you? Why are you so stupid? There was a bat on the floor. Why didn't you pick up the bat and hit him in the head?" I'm like, "Because there's this much space, and I would have had to kind of go up like this and say, 'Pardon me, could you put the knife down so I can bat you?'" So here my family is telling me I'm, dumbass. I'm like, "But I survived. I got out of it. I survived." They're like, unique. So a few days pass by, police call, and they say, "We found him." They said, "Can you come to the police station?" And I said, "Well, how'd you find him?" So I go to the police station. "How'd you find him?" "Well, they found him with helicopter." "Well, he took the car and he went to this place. He wanted to rob a bank because you only had $7 in your wallet. So he needed to rob a bank. So he walked into the place and he walked up to the window and he said, I guess he had his knife, 'Give me all your cash or else.'" And so the girl who was the receptionist at the dentist's office said, "The bank's next door." Go there. So she called the police, they picked him up, and the story. So they asked me, what did he have on him? I said, about a 7-inch blade. And they said, "Is that all?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they paused and paused and paused. I'm like, he said, "Is that sure you didn't know anything, nothing else?" I'm like, "No, is there something you want to tell me?" And then they're like, "He had a butcher knife on him." And I was like, "Oh." He trashed the gold Cadillac with the champagne leather interior. Man, was my mother pissed. And I was like,
Yes.
One of my favorite moments is when somebody says "fuck" for the first time in a storytelling night, and that was good. So now you did it, they went, "Ugh," and now we're all there. So when I do it multiple times with my stories, you've already been inoculated, right? It's crazy. All right, moving along. Stacy Hartman.
Hi, I'm going to tell a story tonight in honor of my grandmother. She was my first storyteller I ever heard tell. And she loved to tell me stories about wolves. And she told me the story of the big bad wolf and the 3 little pigs, Little Red Riding Hood, and the big bad wolf. And so I'm going to tell a story that she never told me, but I read it in a book. And it's called The Little Wolf Who Cried Boy. Once upon a time, there was a family of wolves, and they were very happy wolves. They stole sheep, chased deer, and fed on muskrats and squirrels and things like that. They were all very happy except for Little Wolf. He was always complaining about what his mother cooked for dinner. "Oh, lamb burgers again? Ugh, I hate lamb burgers." Or, "Sloppy doughs. Ugh, just had sloppy doughs last night." "Stop your complaining, son." But it didn't do any good how many times they scolded him. He always kept complaining because what he really wanted to eat was boys. "Why can't we ever have boys for dinner, Ma?" Oh, we haven't had boys in so long. Well, son, boys are kind of hard to come by these days. You know, I remember days when boys were just easy to pick up off the hill. A shepherd boy here, a farmer boy there. But boys don't go out much anymore. They mainly stay at home and play video games all the time. I remember my mom, my sweet mom, making me boy chops and a boy baked potato and a slice of boysenberry pie. But I don't think you better get your hopes up, son, because like I said, boys are really hard to come by. So just eat your supper and stop complaining. But Dad, what if I do find a boy someday in the woods? Well, son, if you do ever find a boy in the woods, your mother and I would be happy to catch him and cook him up for supper for you. But don't get your hopes up, like I said. So, the next day, Little Wolf was on his way home from school, like always, and he sniffed the air, and he could smell his mother cooking supper. Ew, 3-pig salad again? Oh, I hate 3-pig salad. And then he remembered what his father told him, and he decided that he'd play a trick on his parents, and maybe put off having that awful dinner again. So he started running towards their cave, and he shouted, "Boy! Boy! I just saw a boy in the woods!" And his mother and father came running out of the cave as fast as they could. They searched all through the woods. They went up over the hill, down to the creek. They sniffed behind every rock. They looked at every hollow log, but they could not find a boy anywhere. Sorry, son, better luck next time. We just couldn't find the boy. And Little Wolf tried really hard to look disappointed, but it was all they could do to keep from smiling. And then the trick got even better, because when they went inside the cave to eat their dinner, oh, will you look at this 3-pig salad? It's just completely ruined. The bricks are all limp, and the straw is all wilted, and the sticks are just sticky. Well, it's okay, dear. We'll just make do with snacks tonight. So they ate chipmunks and dip and went to bed. Little Wolf was thrilled with this. And so he was so happy, in fact, that the very next day he decided to play the same trick again. Boy, I just saw that boy again in the woods! If you hurry, we can catch him. So out ran mother and father out of the cave, up over the hill. They looked in every hollow log. They sniffed behind every rock, but they could not find that boy anywhere. They dragged home panting to the cave, and Mother Wolf realized that, oh, I left the porcupine upside down cake in the oven and it's completely ruined. Oh, gee, I guess we'll have to have snacks again tonight, Mother. Oh. But Father noticed a smirk on his face. He was very suspicious. And later that night, Father overheard him talking to one of his friends on the phone. That's right. And I didn't have to eat my dinner tonight either. I think I'll tell him there's a boy in the woods tomorrow, too. Well, Father Wolf went straight to Mother Wolf, and they talked this over. And they both agreed that the very next evening they would completely ignore Little Wolf and all his tricks. So the next day, Little Wolf's on his way home from school. He sniffs the air. Oh, muskrat tatooey. Oh, I hate muskrat tatooey. And he was just about to shout boy when the most peculiar thing happened. A whole troop of boys marched right out in front of him in the woods. It was Cub Scout Troop number 7 out for their annual camp out. Boys! Little Wolf ran to the cave as fast as he could. Boys! Boys! But no one came out of the cave. He ran right on into the cave, and he said, there's boys out there, more boys than I can count. Big boys, little boys, fat boys, skinny boys. Enough boys to fill up our freezer. That's nice, dear, but I've already made our dinner. And Father Wolf sat down and opened the newspaper in front of his face. Well, about that time, a little boy from troop number 7 came wandering into the cave. He was a curious little boy, a mischievous kind, just like Little Wolf. And he wanted to get a closer look at the cave. Well, there's a boy! Right, there's one of them right here in our cave, Mom! And the little boy sat down on the couch. He's on the couch while we... But no matter what Little Wolf did or said, he couldn't get anyone to look. Please, just look, he's right here. That's enough, dear. We've had enough of your tricks. We're not gonna fall for that again, said Father behind the paper. But he's right here. I'm not telling a lie this time, honest, said Little Wolf. But the little boy looked at his watch, got up, and tiptoed out. Look, quick, he's about to leave, look! But by the time Father Wolf lowered the newspaper, the boy was gone. You just missed him, he was right here. If we go outside, you can get... That'll be enough, we will do no such thing. We've had enough of this lying, young man. From now on, you will eat your dinner without complaining. That's right, and we'll have no more of this fibbing. All right, said Little Wolf. And Little Wolf ate his dinner without complaining from then on, and he never, ever shouted boy again.
Right, it's 9 o'clock, but we've got 2 more storytellers, so all I can say is, if you get a long story, snip it. All right? In the nicest possible way, get to the point. Rock and roll, very nice. I like that. And it's one of the things that, honestly, from Chicago, most of the storytelling nights are true stories, are personal stories. So it's nice to hear a different style of story. One of the reasons I liked coming here tonight. That was good. Dorothy Roby.
Yeah, come on, darling. Come on!
Inasmuch as all stories become personal stories by the fact that the storyteller chooses them, I believe this is true, that somehow, anytime I tell this story, you will see why it's a personal story for me, or why it could be. This is a story of Demeter, the Greek goddess. The Romans adopted her as a deity and called her Ceres. And today, this goddess of the harvest is embedded in our culture and our language. As a matter of fact, she's the goddess of the cereal box, because the word cereal comes from the name Ceres. Anyway, this is a story of the mother's love for her daughter. Her daughter was named Persephone, and together, she and her mother were the ones who saw that the harvest was brought in, that the grapes blossomed, and the fields thrived. When she was not on earth tending to her fields, Demeter sat up on Olympus on a golden throne with the pantheon, the Greek gods and goddesses, in a world of beauty, golden thrones, continual sunlight, and she always had her little daughter, her beautiful little daughter, young daughter, Persephone, by her side. Once upon a time, when she was on earth to tend to her fields, her daughter strayed away from her and subsequently disappeared. Now, what had happened takes a little bit of backstory, and I want to cut it short, but she was abducted by the god of the underworld, whose name was Hades. And he was a grim god. He was so feared that people on earth did not dare say his name for fear he would comfort them. They called him the Rich One. And indeed he was, because all the minerals and the gold and the oil and the petroleum and everything under the earth belonged to Hades. The one thing he didn't have was any joy in his life, because he lived in a dark world where nothing grew except for one tree that bore fruit, and that was a pomegranate. Well, after Persephone was abducted, the mother began to grieve. Demeter began to grieve, and so the result was that the earth grieved too, and the flowers wilted, the leaves on the trees just crumbled and fell off, and everything became dry, and everything became wilted, and nothing would grow because she was grieving, and she looked for her daughter and couldn't find her. But she had been taken by Hades as his queen down to Hades. And she sat on a throne there and suffered because she was used to the sunlit world. She had been the kind of young woman who, where she stepped or danced across the meadows of the grass, wildflowers would spring up in her footsteps. And you could, girlish laughter all the time. So the world began to crumble, and the world began to die. People were starving, and Zeus asked her to put things back the way they were. But by then, this beautiful goddess had become a little bent, shrunken old woman, grieving for her daughter. So Zeus sent a message to Hades that he had to return Persephone to her mother, because he could not let the world perish. By this time, Persephone knew that her daughter was with Hades, because she had gone looking all over for her and couldn't find a clue as to where her daughter was, until one day she went back to the meadow where the girl had disappeared. And she heard, she said, asked the sun, she said, "Did you see what happened to my daughter?" And the sun said, "No, that day the clouds were covering my face." So she sat down and wept by a brook, and she heard a sound in the gurgling brook, and it seemed to her that the sound was saying, "Hades has your daughter." So that's how she finally discovered what had happened. Well, seems to be a rule in Hades. The rule was that if you once, and this was their belief, that if you crossed over the river Styx into Hades, you never could return. It was guarded by a three-headed dog with a spiked tail, and the dog would chase people around and prevent anybody from coming back, which is their way of accounting for death being as final as it is. So Zeus contacts Hades and tells him the girl has to come back. But another thing that they had operating was that if the girl had eaten anything while she was in Hades, that she could not return to Earth, because she'd partaken of the food of the dead. And unfortunately, at one time, when she was distracted and sad, she had put some pomegranate seeds in her mouth from the one tree that grew. And she was told, someone told on her and said, well, she has eaten the food of the dead. She cannot come back. She's eaten 3 pomegranate seeds. So the upshot of it was that Zeus could not allow the world to perish, and he could not stop. He could not change the rules, so he compromised. A compromise was reached. He said that she could spend 1 month a year. She could come back to her mother, but she had to spend 1 month in Hades for every seed that she ate. So what happened, and that's the bargain that was struck. So, I'm sorry, my mouth is very dry. I guess I'm nervous. She came back to Earth, and now she has to stay with her mother, and her mother was so overjoyed that when she returned to Earth, everything lit up again. It was fine. Everything started growing again, and but when the time comes for her to go back and stay in Hades, the world gets cold and dark again, and nothing grows. And so this is the way the Greeks accounted for the seasonal change. And if you listen closely, you hear not only the sounds of my story, badly sort of nervously told, but the sounds of a mother's grief. And I don't know how many mothers have not been through some grief, or feared for losing a child, or losing a daughter, or just even the loss of an empty nest can be pretty profound. But listen, do you hear it? Do you hear the faint sound of footsteps and girlish laughter approaching? It's the time of the year for Persephone to come back to be with Demeter, and the flowers will bloom again, and the grass will grow, and the fields will be full of sustenance for mankind. Thank you.
Yeah.
I did not know, and I find it, and this indicates my liberal political stance, that the father of hell was also known as the rich one and petroleum. Just one of those things I caught. All right, our last open micer, George Bailey.
Oh, man.
I'm an older virgin. So I'd like to tell a series of montages about how moving from the south to the north educated me. So my family is personal. My family arrived in what was then called Hell's Kitchen in 1956. So if you don't know what Hell's Kitchen is, it was Cabrini before Cabrini was Cabrini. Mother Cabrini was an Italian neighborhood over there. And we moved into what my mother called the nastiest place in the world. It was an English basement on Blackhawk Street. And on Blackhawk Street, the coal men came. Every morning, someone had to buy coal. And these coal men, they wore black. And they looked like they were made out of coal. Their hands were so cold and hard in the wintertime. Well, when we first moved into this English basement, of course we had to go to school. We went to a school called Frederick von Schiller Public School, which was an old Gothic school, scary, and it had a whooping machine in the basement. We all knew it had a whooping machine in the basement because we heard it, And the teachers would tell you, if you're not good, I'll give you to the custodian and he'll take you down there and he'll put the whooping machine on. That school, there were 3 teachers who taught in this school. One, Mr. Harris, he was a maniac. He used to bring a sock filled with other socks to school and arithmetic. And if you didn't do your long division right, he would hit you over the head. The socks, left no marks. And there were 2 other teachers, and they lived in the neighborhood, but they became teachers. One was named Mr. Lagatuda. And Mr. Lagatuda pooted all the time. He would walk past you doing this. Sorry. I'm trying to sure. And, he loved Italian food. The other teacher, he used to tell us wonderful stories. His name was Mr. Vizo. He had been a sailor in the Navy during World War II. Young guy, good looking. My sister fell in love with him. And he would tell us stories about submarines that went underwater, and then when they came out of the water, they were like cars coming up out of the water. Well, in this neighborhood, which was Chicago Avenue, there was a produce market there called National Tea. I don't know any National Tea. And all of the merchants from Fulton Street, some of those merchants would go down there and buy produce, bananas, oranges, melons. And my uncle, who was a sharecropper, and just by all of my uncles from northern Alabama moved to Chicago, and we lived in this little cluster right at the corner of Ogden. Mm-hmm. Remember the Ogden Bridge? They would have drag races on the Ogden Bridge. And at this intersection, my uncle, who loved horses, who saw very little of the wildness and the cleanness of the country in the city. And he would hunt, he would search these places to find in the fall, especially he loved the fall, because in the fall, things turned gold, the birds would come out and eat the seeds, and he would go down to the market and buy all kinds of produce and borrow this, I think his name was Mordecai. He would borrow Mordecai's horse and hitch it to a wagon. He would go up and down the street selling turnip greens, all kinds of green things, collard greens. Turns out that Mordecai had been a real estate magnate before all of the Italians started to move to Melrose Park, Stone Park, Cicero. And there were very few of the old Italian families left in this community. And he would, Mordecai would tell them, well, maybe you should buy other stuff. And he says, man, you know what you're talking about. Colored folk ain't gonna buy this. I mean, they're not interested in those kinds of foods. And what he meant by those kinds of foods was the foods that they sold at the feast, the festivals. It's the first time I've ever encountered a festival. Festivals were places where you bought what we call babalushas. L'escargot, snails. Why would anyone eat a snail? And they would sell things like garbanzo beans, and these men with these nasty smelling cigars, the old black rope cigars, would buy these garbanzo beans, and they would sit. Then they had vaulted sidewalks, the vaulted sidewalks, and under these sidewalks, people actually lived in the summertime because it was cool. And they would go down there and they would play pinochle, and in the backyard, there would be enough space for them to play bocce ball. And I could not understand why all of these old men would be rolling these black balls, and the black balls didn't do anything. What was the point of all of this? In this neighborhood, there were these gorgeous women and men who were breaking the law by black men and black women and Italian men would become lovers. And that would be the talk of the neighborhood. And one man especially, his name was Carmen, and he had the most beautiful Junebug green Dataflow Buick. I don't know, 1950, 1949 Buick. And he also fell in love with this girl. Her name was Marisol. And one morning, we found her body in his car where he had cut her throat because she had cheated on him. So living in Hell's Kitchen, and going to Frederick Von Schiller School caused me to have to change everything that I knew about the world. Gone were, as my mother called, the clean fields. There were no trees. There was no jungle to play in. There was no creek bank. But you did have these big parks that were kind of scary because the people who came to the park were always fighting with bats. And the black gangs and the Italian gangs would come to these parks and head over the parks. So in Frederick Von Schiller School, I met some of the most amazing people. One was William Johnson, and he knew the language of arithmetic. And when we were in 7th and 8th grade, he showed me how to make a telescope. And in making this telescope, we would grind the mirrors. 4 or 5 different kinds of sand, grinding the mirrors. He also became a teacher of arithmetic because Mr. Harris didn't know how to teach long division. He did not know how to teach long division. And then there was Herman Wolf, another person. He lived on North Avenue and Orchard Street. like right across the street from the Kino Theater. And Herman's mother saw us talking one day, and she deputized me to be Herman's friend at Frederick von Schiller High School because all of the Italian kids and all of the German kids were moving out. And she wanted me to pick Herman up and take him to school. And for that, they would always let me come up to their department, and they would have 4 or 5 different kinds of bologna. So, the last part of this is being introduced to the people who had gone through World War II, because World War II was still pretty close in people's imagination. And Herman Wolf, he built German Messerschmitts 109s, Japanese Zeros, these airplanes, P-51 Mustangs, built all of these. And he also was generous to a fault because he pulled his money out in the wrong place all the time. People took it from him. Right next door to us lived an old German Jewish couple, the last ones who had lived in the neighborhood. And they put, if not concertina wire, around their windows. It was barbed wire. And they always came out in the summertime with olive green wool clothes on. And they smelled. And they smelled so badly. But we always saw the numbers on their arms, and we didn't know what they were. So one day, they disappeared. They never came out again. And then we started smelling the neighborhood. So finally, someone said, you know, we need to call the police. Not the police, but the police. We called the police. And the police came. That was when they had those black cars with the red light on top. And they opened the door, and a cloud of black flies just rushed out into the neighborhood. And the neighborhood smelled for weeks and weeks. And when they carried these people out, they carried them in bags that dripped. So that was my first introduction to, that was a part of my introduction to the various kinds of people who lived in the world once I moved out of the South and only knew white people who were always in charge of things. So thank you.
Break. Get up, walk around, not too long, 5-6 minutes. The restroom is down the hall. We want to hear Don. We also have another speaker from the National Association of Black Storytellers who's going to tell us a story. We want to hear a little bit more from a special speaker. Walk around, take a little break, and if you are not on the Illinois Storytelling email list, please sign up on our email list. We are taking donations for Illinois Storytelling on your walk around. Please think about that as well. And so he is in town. He can tell you about it. Their conference, the National Storytelling Association of Black Storytellers, is having their conference here in November. You can say a little bit about that and maybe tell us a little story.
Sure. Hey everybody.
Hey.
Everybody on here, y'all. Well, y'all know what y'all is, right? What is y'all?
All you.
Us, that's right, y'all. That's right. Not you all. I can say you all, but y'all. But anyway, the National Association of Black Storytellers and our co-host, the Chicago Association of Black Storytellers, Ashe, will be co-hosting the festival. November 12th through the 16th. We'll be at the Hilton Oak Lawn. and it's at the Hilton Oak Lawn because that's where it is. Everybody said it's a good central location so that city folk, non-city folk can get here and et cetera, et cetera. So that's where we are. So be looking for what's happening. You definitely want to catch some of the events. There's a concert every night. Linda, come up real quick. Linda Gomez, Linda is the co-festival director, so any questions can be passed through her, and then she'll pass them up to me if there are any questions, because when we have a co-host, it's kind of done two ways. Chicago folks know Chicago folks and know where to put Chicago stuff of the festival. So there may be elements throughout the community. We have a Dr. Teller and Linda, maybe a couple things about that. And so we go two places. So we end up in libraries and schools and in nursing homes and in children's, we show up in places that you wouldn't think we'd show up in. Yeah. We went to about three, I know of one Jewish home that we went to in Atlanta. They wrote the greatest letter because they understand storytelling. And when we showed up, they knew our story. And so there was an interesting connection there. But anyway, November 12th to the 16th, just be looking out for it. And just because it's not, what makes this different is that we talk about what we want to talk about. And we talk about it unedited, and we don't curse. We don't use any language that's derogatory. Everything's family friendly. And what I'm trying to say is, white folks have said, oh, will we be welcome? Yes. But know that if we talk about the kitchen, we don't have time to explain what the kitchen is. Y'all know what the kitchen is? You see, we don't have that time. Yeah. Black storytelling means
collard greens on the pot, in the pot.
Oh yeah, y'all know what pot liquor is, right?
On top of the refrigerator.
Look, they're not there. No. The kitchen is back here. So y'all don't know about that.
Kitchen. I didn't know about that.
All I'm trying to say is that sure, it's supposed to be a cultural experience, because you hear stuff, and we do have people sitting in the audience going, "What's that?" What's that? Because they don't know. But if you ain't gonna learn nothing, then why show up? That's the whole deal, is to learn these different cultural stuff. Because I know I hear some stuff in Jewish stories, and I'm saying, "What's that? What's that? What's the guy's name?" I love listening to him because I always learn Catholic stuff. That's it. The guy who rolls his own cigarettes. Oh, you got to see him. He's over in the corner doing this and stuff. What's that storyteller's name? Anyway, I can see his face. He's thin. He plays the banjo.
Oh, Steve Martin.
No. No, he rolls other kind of stuff. This guy rolls his own cigarette. Okay. Anyway, the bottom line is that we're going to come here to have some fun. And this is our second time being in Chicago. Very first time was my very first festival, which must have been 1989. 86. Wow. Wow, that was my very first festival. But we have a ball, okay? All right. I have a real quick story, and I know what 5 to 8 minutes is. Okay, you know what I'm saying? So I'm going to give you a 5 to 8 minute story. A boy once heard a beautiful music. When he walked into the forest, there on a limb sat this beautiful bird, singing this beautiful music. And the boy, he admired it. But he noticed bird was hungry. So he held out his hand, bird jumped into his palm, he placed him into his pocket, and took him home to feed him. When the father came home, the father asked, "Why are you feeding this senseless bird?" But the boy was persuasive. So he fed bird, and he let bird go. The next day, the boy heard another beautiful song. And when he walked into the forest, there on the same limb sat that same bird singing yet another beautiful song. And the boy, he admired it. But he noticed bird was hungry. So he held out his hand, bird jumped into his palm, he placed him into his pocket, and took him home to feed him. When the father came home, the father asked, "Why are you feeding this senseless bird?" But the boy was persuasive. So he fed bird, and he let bird go. The next day, the boy heard another beautiful song. And sure enough, when he walked into the forest, there on the same limb sat the same bird, singing another beautiful song. Like the boy, he admired. But he noticed bird was hungry. So he held out his hand. Bird jumped into his. He placed him into his and took him home to feed him. When the father came home, the father asked, "Why?" But the boy was. So he fed bird and he Let bird go. I didn't say him or her. I didn't say let him go. Why is this important? Because storytelling is the art of listening, also the art of telling. And if you can't listen, how can you learn? If you can't listen, how do you know what I said? I said the same thing twice. Some of you didn't hear it. Am I wasting my time? That's why we do this. Now think about what I said after you laugh. Your boy once heard another beautiful music. When he walked into the fort, is they all the same? Is that the same? Singing? Another beautiful song, not just another song. Not just another story. Another beautiful song. And the boy, but he noticed God was hungry. So he held out his hand and jumped into his palm. He placed him into his and took him home to feed him. When the father came home, the father asked, but the boy was persuaded. So he fed bird and he let bird go. The next day, the boy heard another beautiful song. And when he walked into the fort, there on that same lips, at that same bird singing yet another beautiful song. And the boy, he still admired it. But he noticed bird was still hungry. So he held out his hand, bird jumped into his palm, he placed him into his pocket and took him home to feed him. When the father came home, father told the boy to go away. When the boy left, the father killed bird. When he killed the bird, he killed the music. He robbed the forest of some of its beauty. Why did the father kill the bird? Ooh, y'all adding a lot to the story. Yes? What were you going to say? What were you going to say?
He's taking the son's food.
We said the same thing now 5 times. And he said none of what you just said. He thought the bird was sensitive. I got all that other stuff in the story. Y'all got him like liking the music. Hey, but why did he gave it away? Why did he think the bird was sensitive?
Because he didn't hear a sound.
Never heard the music. Every time he came home, feeding the bird, he asked the boy, why are you feeding the bird? The boy never answered his question, only being persuasive. Why was he even feeding the bird? Because he admired the music. And if he didn't feed that bird would die. Those things that we love, we have to feed it. And when we feed it, how do we keep it alive? What did that boy have to do? Whose fault is it that the bird is dead?
The boys.
The boy's fault? You blaming the boy? Story said the father killed the bird. But that's normal because we always want to blame somebody else for stuff. That's what it really should be. So what's the deal? He thought the bird was senseless, never heard the music. The boy's feeding the bird because he admired the music. But all he had to say is, Dad, the bird sings. Every day he sings a different song. You've missed all the music he sang before now, but now we can enjoy the music together tomorrow. He sings a different song, beautiful song, every day. Yeah. That's all he had to say. He never said that. Wanted to keep it to himself. So the meaning is those things that we love, we feed it. But not just we feed it, but we have to share it with somebody else so that they'll see the beauty of it. Otherwise, somebody who don't understand will come and take it right away. Yeah. If you don't show up tonight to fill up this room, what's going to happen? College ain't going to give you the room no more. Yeah. They're going to say, don't nobody come here. You got 4 people last week, 6 people the next. But if you enjoyed what you got here, you got to share it with somebody. And not just that, but bring them next time. And then they'll see the beauty in it. Then they'll help keep it alive. They'll start to feel it. But if you keep it to yourself, saying, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine, which is what some storytellers sometimes try to do. You can't tell there, I tell there, I can't go to that library, you can't. No. Then you're killing it. Because it's not yours. You got to share it with everybody. So thank you for the invitation. I'll be looking for us in November because we're coming to share and learn the beauty of it. And that's what we do. And that's what we should all do. Be blessed, y'all.
Totally stealing that, which is why I'm glad you said it 5 times. Oh yeah. Uncle William King wanted me to just do this before I tell my story. The story that I'm going to tell you tonight is a true story. However, Logan, where you at? There he is. He and I, on May 3rd, are going to be participating in the 25th annual Chicago's Biggest Liar contest. Last year was the first. And it was held in a funeral home, and I won.
Yay!
So I'm the returning champion. And my favorite thing is, if you know Scott Whitehair, he's the one that's putting it together. And you can't tell him this. You can't tell him this. Is I've been telling him that the lie I'm going to tell, I mean, it is the most outrageously offensive thing I can think of. We're holding it at church. So I'm just, it involved me in a wheelchair, and I mean, it's really out there. And he totally believes that this is the story I'm going to tell. And to the point where he's actually going to get them to put a ramp.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to show up with a wheelchair. It's not the story I'm going to tell. This is my way to do to him what he's doing to everybody else. So if you get a chance, definitely come to it. Definitely come to it. I'm also going to
May 3rd.
May 3rd, 7 o'clock. I'm also going to read a little bit. Margaret and I talked about this, is that there's lots of styles of storytelling. As long as it's a good story. As long as it's a story, that's really the point, right? And a lot of Chicago groups, pretty much like Right Club specifically, that comes to my mind, read stories. And I guess what I would say is, most stories are just good for the telling, but some stories are written to be read. And you can tell the difference when you hear them. So I'll have something that I wrote specifically in mind when I did this, as I lived this. So here it goes. Actually, the title is, I love this title because I just love this title, The Plate Glass of Inevitability. In 1999, in Chicago, on Wabash Avenue, a 27-year-old woman with her 3-year-old daughter were walking down the street. 32 stories above in the C&R building, and for no reason, and for no premeditation, and for no malice, a 4-foot by 8-foot piece of plate glass window just slipped right out of its moorings and plummeted like a big, heavy glass feather and decapitated the woman in an instant. And it was horrifying, it's true, it was horrifying. But as horrifying as it is, and as horrifying as it was, I couldn't think about all of the things everybody else. I wasn't thinking about the inevitability of death. I wasn't thinking about the fragility of life. All I could think about from that day to this one was, what was she thinking in the last 10 seconds? We mostly see death coming. It's a car accident, plane crash, heart attack sometimes. And we hear about seeing our life flash before our eyes. We've heard that phrase. But this woman didn't have any of that. It was instantaneous. It was silent. Her head was lopped off in a millisecond. And I wonder, what was she thinking about in her last 10 seconds? And I assume she's probably like most of us. I assume that she was thinking about banal stuff. She was thinking about bills that she had to pay, or petty disputes she had with a romantic triangle, or mad at somebody who worked for stealing her Cheetos. Who knows what she was thinking? But it was usually, if she was like most people, it was just bullshit. It was crap that didn't matter. It was just stuff. And she was robbed of that moment to think something amazing at that moment of truth. 28 years before that plate glass locked off that woman's head, I started to have hallucinations. I was 5. I don't really remember specifics except for the fact that I remember being covered in spiders. My 20-year-old mother, so do the math, she had me when she was 15, was told by my pediatrician, who was actually named Dr. Blood, that I had spinal meningitis. The spinal meningitis was known as the child killer in the 60s. It's a degenerative disease that erodes your spinal cord. And it was a killer. Children died by the thousands from this thing. And Dr. Blood told my mother that there was very little to no chance I was going to live. She was very clear. She did not want to give her false hope, that there was almost no way I was surviving this. And because my mother wouldn't accept that, if I did by some miracle survive this, there was almost no chance that I would be blind or deaf or have severe brain damage or be physically disabled or all four. I made that cut. I managed somehow, with ridiculously low odds, to survive. I was listed, my case was listed in the Kansas Journal of Medicine for about 15 years as an unexplained recovery. And my mother knew I was special. I was saved by the universe, and as soon as a couple of years later when she found Christ, I was saved by divine intervention. So like Sarah Connor in the Terminator movies, my mother had me, the chosen one, and my poor sister, who unfortunately was not chosen. And we traveled the country. Mother was not great at finding men to marry, so she married frequently. And we moved everywhere. And we lived everywhere. We were nomads. We were gypsies. We really didn't have a solid place to land. And because of that, every place I went, I was perpetually the new kid. I was in a different grade school every single year until 8th grade. We lived in a duplex in Peoria, Arizona. We lived in an apartment complex in Wichita, Kansas, in a trailer in Lincoln, Nebraska. And then 14 years later, my home became a dorm room in Fayetteville, Arkansas, at the University of Arkansas. And that year, I started to have blinding headaches, like the migraines you hear about if you've ever had one. And I was in college, so I thought maybe it was the fact that I just drank a lot. But because I was on a full ride band scholarship and the University of Arkansas at the time had free medical care for their students, I could go without telling my mom that I was a drunk and go and have myself checked out. And I had the doctor. The doctor looked like Wilford Brimley, but not the oatmeal Wilford Brimley, the Firm. Remember the Firm, the Tom Cruise, where he's like a murderous evil man? That Wilford Brimley. And Wilford, I think he hated college students because we were so careless, and he was the guy that had to take care of all these idiots. And so he didn't really, there was no bedside manner to this man. And he looked at me, and then he scheduled me for an MRI. And I had a CAT scan. And he sat me down and told me that I didn't have an aneurysm, that I had 7 aneurysms in a 2-inch cluster right here. Now, a lot of people, if you were like me at the time, think the aneurysm is what kills you, and it is not. An aneurysm is literally a weakening of a capillary wall that bubbles out into a little weak bubble. And what kills you is when that bubble bursts. It's called cerebral hemorrhage, and you can get a stroke and you can die from it. I had 7. They can operate on them, but because it was in such a tiny little piece of real estate, they didn't want to, because it was a lot. You know, how much my brain could have cut out, I guess was the idea. And he recommended that I drop out of school, and that and he told me that I was going to die in 5 years, that I had about 5 years to live. But he didn't understand. I'm an Irish kid that was saved by divine intervention for something special. And so my reaction to being told that I had 5 years to live was to A, not tell my family, and B, spend the next 5 years having more sex than is legally, drinking more booze, doing every drug imaginable, doing reckless, terrible things. I was furious. I was angry. The world was my punching bag. I became a provocateur. I would start bar fights for no reason at all, except for that I'm Irish and I'm pissed off. And after 5 years, I was still alive. And I had a degree, but no more scholarship. And I had to go out into the world and survive. And thus began the myth. Now, we all have myths. We live by myths. Myths motivate us to do all kinds of stuff. Some of them are tiny myths, you know, like you can't walk under a ladder, you know, you can't say Macbeth in a theater, this kind of stuff. And some of them are much larger. Some myths are much larger. Religions are myths. I mean, while some may be believers in Christ, anybody that legitimately believes that somebody was born of a virgin birth is, okay, that's fine, and I'm glad that you believe that. I don't, but okay. But what I will say is myths fuel what we do in our everyday, and the myths that you choose determine the path you take. My myth was that I was going to die when I was 45. And I don't know where that number came from. Maybe it was like that just seemed really old. 45, you know? But I knew, and I don't know, but I knew I was going to die at 45, not before. No matter what I did, no matter what stupid shit I got myself into, I would not die before 45. But 45 was the end. And it became pervasive. It wasn't like I thought about it every day, like people believe in religion and you think about it every day. It's just there in the background, and you just know it's going to happen. And so I knew I was born for something special, and I'm dying at 45, so I better get moving. And I was still a gypsy. I was still a nomad, and I left college, and I didn't know what to do. So I moved in with my mom for 3 months and realized the abject humiliation of being a college graduate living with his mom. So I got in my truck, and I left with everything. I had no idea where I was going. And 10 years after, or no, 10 years before, rather, that plate glass came down, I landed in St. Louis. I spent 2 days in St. Louis and went, no, I'm not going to live here. This is not for me. And I kept driving. And the next major city I got to was Chicago. And from the second I drove onto Lakeshore Drive, I knew I'd found a home, finally. Everything about Chicago appealed to me. The language, the attitude, the food. Yes, it is it's not actually the most, but one of the most segregated cities on the planet. But there are neighborhoods filled with people and languages and food, and it's so exciting. And I went, I'm home. I'm in a land of perpetual new kids. And then I did stupid things. Because I could. I was dying when I was 45. You can't kill me. I did really reckless things. I signed a lease, a 4-year lease on a theater on Halsted and Belmont. It was $3,000 a month, which plus utilities, and I had $18 in my checking account when I signed it. We kept that place open for 3 years, so that was good. I got hugely fat and smoked 3 packs a day of cigarettes, and then I lost all that weight, and I still smoke, but only 1 pack a day, so that's good. I got pretentious tattoos. I was on the Morton Downey Jr. show in a red G-string bikini. I really was. I did all kinds of reckless things for no good reason other than I was impermeable. I could not be harmed. Around the time I was 40, one of the things that you live when you are told you're special, and you create a myth in your mind of death at 45, is that you do a lot of very odd soul searching, trying to figure out exactly who you are in the world. And so, when I was 40, I wrote this. 5 a.m. The alarm goes off and it's familiar sonar beeping, and I hit snooze twice. Down to the office, I weigh myself same time every morning. Make a pot of coffee. Out on the back porch for a morning smoke. Coffee, the internet for my version of the morning paper. The dog comes down to go outside and pee. Caffeine. 20 minutes on the exercise bike, some pull-ups, and it's time to clean up for the inevitable exit. I look in the mirror. The face that stares back is familiar, but I'm not entirely sure who he is. Like a David Cronenberg film or Tim Robbins in Jacob's Ladder, my face seems to shift slightly out of focus as if the mirror can't quite get a grip on the lines of my hair, eyes, nose, chin. It isn't a violent thing, but it makes my stomach queasy for a breath. Who the fuck is this guy I'm looking at? When I was a much much younger child, I had a recurring dream. In the dream, a world of grayscale, I'm standing on one side of a violent, thrashing river, perhaps 100 yards from the other side. The wind blows in random gusts, and the water responds in plumes and sprays, daring me to try to cross. On the far side is a figure, but I can't quite make him out. I try to screw my eyes harder to see his face, to read the expression, to connect. And because it's a dream, the face becomes closer, clearer. And while I'm aware of the inevitable rage passing between our gazes, I can see that he's trying to look into me as well. And I get the feeling that he is me, that he may have something important to tell me, something vital. The feeling that I desperately need to connect with this person on the far side of the raging nature is overwhelming. As if my need is so powerful that it can move the confines of the physical world, I notice that the river begins to shrink, and he and I are closing in on one another as we get closer, as if the very act of minimalization infuriates the river. The wind and water become even more violent and hurricane-like, making seeing him even more difficult. This continues until I can almost see him clearly, confirm that he is me, and receive that urgent message, and I wake up. I don't know how many times I had this dream, but I believe it was nightly for years. From the time I was 3 or 4 until around my 8th year. A habit of mine in my much, much younger days was to rock myself to sleep on all fours. Not really so unusual, except that I would rock so hard that I would bang my head on the wall over and over, eventually creating a permanent indentation in the drywall and cracking 2 of my wooden cribs. I think this was my 3 and 4-year-old way of trying to knock this dream out of my head. While I managed to eventually stop having this dream, it stays with me. Who is that guy on the other side of the river? Mirror. My life is that of a gypsy, roaming from place to place, job to job. I've worked construction and been a public school teacher. I've done huge spectacle musical theater, cheesy improvised comedy, pretentious performance art. I've said "till death do us part" in front of my family twice and was proven wrong both times. I've had friends and family die, and yet I have never attended a funeral. I talk too much. I smoke too much. I am a disappointed optimist and have trouble reconciling my love of individuals with my disdain for people. And I still look in the mirror across the raging river and wonder who that fucker is and what he has to tell me. And it occurs to me that maybe I'm the guy on the other side of the river now. Older, marginally wiser, trying to tell my much, much younger self something vital and important. But I'm not sure what it is. Is it about relationships? Is it that it's okay to be alone as long as you aren't lonely? That compromises have to be made in order to keep those tenuous but essential love connections vital? Is it about organized religion and the pernicious tendency to fall into mob mentality? Is it about voting with your brain and not your emotional response? Or that making art with the primary goal of making money is an empty and sad pursuit? Is it that I need to tell my much, much younger self that death is an inevitability, but fear of the inevitable is a monumental waste of the few seconds granted in between womb and tomb? That manscaping is only really useful when dating women much younger than yourself, or in the summertime so your balls get a break from the heat. That looking at pretty women is absolutely acceptable, and that tits are shaped that way to attract your attention, and that as long as you understand that women are not objects, but living, breathing people who do tend to make you pre-verbal and idiots, then wanting and having sex is perfectly normal. That drugs are excellent unless you give the drugs the keys to your self-control, but that once in a while losing your self-control is a part of living as long as you do no harm to anyone else. That guilt is a method of control more than a moral imperative. Am I supposed to yell across the mirror? You will fail far more than you succeed, but that's good because the failures make the successes taste better. Is the unknown mystery man on the other side of the mirror river just trying to tell me that scars mean you're still alive? And that the more scars you have, the more life you had? And as I reflect upon my reflection, I understand at least one thing that makes sense. It's all about change, and change, and change. And the jackass staring back at me with the slightly jowly neck due to being fat and losing it in the bifocal glasses is so different from who I thought I'd be, and will be completely different in a year and in 5 years. That the very idea of predicting those changes is as pointless as latching onto a fashion trend. A friend, at least I call him a friend, who teaches a course at UIC, has his students try to write down where they'll be,
who they'll be in 5 years. He gives me 50 words to clarify this answer. I can do it in 5 words, which is remarkable, given that I can't tell you how the weather is in less than 25. Where will I be? Who will I be in 5 years, considering who I was 5 years ago? Overweight, recently divorced, unemployed, uninsured, uninspired, and who I am right now, at this very moment. 5 words. Where will I be? Who will I be in 5 years? I have no fucking idea. And 2 years ago, something cataclysmic happened. 2 years ago, something that threw all of my belief systems into array. I turned 46. And now I was like Sarah Connor at the end of the Terminator movies, where she looks and she solved the problem and the Terminator is dead, and now she has a highway and no idea where it leads. And that shit's scary when you're so certain your whole life of where things are gonna go, and then suddenly it's all crap. You don't know where you're going. And I don't know when that plate glass is coming, but I know it's gonna. That's the one thing I know will happen. That plate glass is coming for me. I don't know when, I don't know how old I'll be. I don't know if I will be here to do something special or not. But that can't be the point. What I hope is in my last 10 seconds, before the plate glass lops my head off, I'm eating something delicious, I'm telling a story, I'm having sex, I'm teaching somebody something vital, I'm dancing, I'm having sex. But whatever it is, I hope that in that last 10 seconds, right before my head gets lopped off, I'm doing something that makes me smile. Thank you. I do want to throw out, as much as it's plugging to come see the Liars thing, and do yourself a favor, and do everybody in all these rooms around Chicago and Homewood and everywhere, do them a favor too. You have spent an evening, and some of you told stories, but most of you listened. Most of you listened to stories, which is the first part of the contract. The second part of the contract is get off your ass and go tell your own stories, because we're listening and we want to hear them. Do that.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Woo-hoo. That was a great story.
Well, thank you.
Great. And it's really nice to, I've heard Don tell every time I go to the Moth, but to hear you tell the longer story is really nice.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's really nice.
It's fun, fun, good challenge.
I know.
It explains a lot.
Yeah.
And whoever comes to dinner will get to hear the epilogue. It's weirder than you think.
Good. Well, I hope you enjoyed this night. This was a fun night of lots of different kinds of stories and storytelling, and just a little sample of Illinois storytelling and the kinds of programs that we offer. And every month we're here. We're not here July and August, but May and June we still have left, but it is May 10th and June 14th. So those months it's the second Saturday instead of the first Saturday because of events here that are going on at Dominican. So, I don't have any other announcements. Anybody have any other announcements?
Make sure you pick up a Liars Club poster because it's got all the information on it. And if you bring the poster with you, you will get a boysenberry pie. That's a lie.
They can sign
sign up to be on the email list?
Yes,
There you go.
sign up on the email list if you haven't contributed to Illinois Storytelling. In addition to the programs that we do, we fund a lot of storytellers going into schools and libraries and community centers all around the state. We get grants, and we really are trying to keep storytelling alive in the schools and the libraries and the communities as well in places like this. Linda?
If anyone is at all interested in the National Association of Black Storytellers Conference in November, I will start another sign-up list. I'd love to take your email and your name, so we can let you know what's going on.
And Saturday, April 19th, at the Spoken Word Cafe with Jim May, we've got poetry and stories.
All right, that's in Woodstock.
In Woodstock, Illinois.
We are doing so much fun stuff in storytelling around the Chicago area.
Come to the Moth. Come on, come to the Moth.
Yes.
We gotta get there early, we sell out fast. But the
You
food's
do.
good and the booze is good, the story's always good. Rock on.
Right.
There was
Okay, thank you once again for coming.